The story begins 1,300 years ago, on a desolate and rocky battlefield. Three figures, two male warriors and a woman, stood amidst the aftermath of a fierce battle. Suddenly, the ground began to churn, and a horrifying swarm of pale, grotesque creatures with red limbs clawed their way to the surface. The red-haired warrior, wielding a spear glowing with crimson energy, fought back desperately. He exclaimed in frustration that the monsters just kept coming, one after another, in an endless tide. His comrades watched in dismay. The woman identified the event as the egg-laying of the calamity demon, and another warrior somberly noted that, once again, they had arrived too late to stop it. The red-haired man, filled with grim resignation, declared that it couldn't be helped. He stated that, as they had done in the past, they would have to sacrifice everyone's lives to seal the threat away. Just as they accepted their fate, a new voice cut through the chaos, stating that a sacrifice would not be necessary. A man with dark blue hair and a confident smirk appeared, his hand crackling with intense blue energy. The original three looked on in shock as this newcomer unleashed a massive, overwhelming beam of power, obliterating the swarm with ease. Standing amidst the lingering energy of his attack, the mysterious man looked down on the struggling group and questioned why they were having such trouble against what he considered to be small fry. The assembled group of warriors, including the red-haired man and his companions, could only stare in utter shock and disbelief at the stranger's overwhelming power. Despite the man's devastating attack, the grotesque creatures continued to pour endlessly from the chasm in the earth. The newcomer observed this calmly, noting that they just kept on coming. Unfazed, he turned to the stunned warriors. He confidently told them to hide behind his back, proclaiming that he would defeat the calamity demon all by himself. He then walked alone toward the smoking crater, the source of the demonic horde. With a look of intense determination, the man declared his supreme power, stating that he had obtained 108 abilities. He identified himself as the absolute monarch, the Almighty, as he gathered another immense sphere of crackling blue energy in his hand, ready to face the endless swarm. The absolute monarch approached the edge of the chasm and discovered the source of the endless horde, a gargantuan, fleshy demon at the bottom, actively spawning the smaller creatures from pulsating, red egg sacs. Filled with resolve, he declared that he could not allow the production of these man-eating beasts to continue. With a sarcastic apology for interrupting its labor, the monarch, now glowing with golden energy, stated his intention to drag the demon out from its lair. He launched a brilliant arc of golden power that ensnared the creature, forcibly ripping it from the chasm and onto the open ground. Freed from its pit, the calamity demon revealed its true, monstrous form, towering over the monarch with a horrifying, circular maw filled with teeth. The beast immediately began to charge a massive blast of purple energy from its mouth. In response, the monarch raised his own hand, meeting the threat by unleashing a powerful beam of blue light. The monarch's beam of pure blue energy collided with the demon's purple blast, and a fierce struggle for dominance ensued. As their powers clashed, the history of this ancient conflict was revealed. Since the dawn of creation, humanity has fought against the calamity demon, an abomination that appears every 300 years along with the man-eating monsters it spawns. A specialized group of heroes, known as the 100-man unit, has always been at the forefront of this battle. These warriors reincarnate every 300 years, their destinies intertwined with the demon's revival, fated to seal it away at the cost of their own lives. But this time was different. The monarch's power proved superior, overwhelming the demon's attack and striking the creature head-on. As the smoke cleared, he stood before the wounded but still defiant beast and declared that its life would end here. Rejecting the cycle of sacrifice, the monarch announced that the time for half-measures like sealing was over. Engulfed in a brilliant golden aura, he proclaimed that he would annihilate the demon himself. He began to gather all of his power for one final strike, stating that he could only unleash the combined almighty power of his 108 abilities once. Staking everything on this single attack, he released his energy, and the battlefield was consumed by a blinding, massive explosion. Just as the monarch prepared to unleash his final, decisive blow, he was suddenly impaled from behind by a glowing red spear. Coughing up blood, he looked down in shock, unable to comprehend the attack. His assailant was the red-haired warrior, McGreedy, one of the very people he had just saved. The monarch, weakened and defeated, fell to the ground, questioning his comrade's betrayal. McGreedy stood over him, his face a mask of grim determination. He revealed his shocking motive: he could not allow the calamity demon to be killed. Therefore, he declared, he would be taking the monarch's 108 powers for himself. With his goal revealed, McGreedy brutally attacked the fallen monarch, dismembering him in a swift and merciless assault. Holding the monarch's head, he added one final, cruel twist. To ensure that the monarch could never return through reincarnation and interfere again, he would curse him with immortality. Having cursed the monarch with immortality, McGreedy began a brutal assault. He slammed the helpless monarch face first into the ground and then unleashed a torrent of the very blue energy he had just stolen, overwhelming the man with his own power. With a cruel, triumphant grin, McGreedy looked down on his broken victim and called him a pitiful, absolute monarch. He kicked the monarch's dismembered body towards the chasm. Standing over the abyss with his two companions, McGreedy delivered his final judgment. He declared that he would seal the now immortal monarch in the abyss, trapping him for eternity alongside the calamity demon. The monarch's broken body was cast into the darkness. From the edge of the pit, McGreedy and the others watched as their former hero fell into his eternal prison. With the monarch's immense power now his, McGreedy and his companions smiled sinisterly. They did not destroy the calamity demon. Instead, they initiated a powerful ritual, conjuring a massive red magical seal over the chasm. The roaring demon, along with its unhatched spawn, was forced back into the depths. With a final surge of energy that shook the very landscape, the seal was set. McGreedy stood calmly amidst the settling dust and debris, confirming that the task was done. Meanwhile, trapped in the eternal darkness of the abyss, the immortal monarch pieced together the horrifying truth. He realized that McGreedy and the others had gone through with the sealing ritual, sacrificing the lives of their fellow warriors, not just to contain the demon, but to imprison him along with it. He was left to question their motives, understanding that they never truly wanted the demon to be slain or for genuine peace to be brought to the world. A dark thought began to form in his mind: if the demon revives every 300 years, perhaps its revival, and the subsequent sealing, brought his betrayers some kind of benefit. The story then shifts to the monarch's fate within the abyss. He lay dismembered and helpless before the calamity demon, remarking with grim acceptance that it looked like they would be together for quite some time. His torment began at once. The demon loomed over him, dripping a corrosive saliva that painfully dissolved his immortal flesh. The beast seemed to take a cruel pleasure in his suffering, bringing a sharp talon to his face as if to mock him. Despite the agony, the monarch remained defiant, taunting the demon for its sadistic amusement despite being a beast of low intelligence. In response, the calamity demon and its swarms of spawn descended upon him, beginning a long and horrifying ordeal where they continued to trample and torment him in every possible way. Just as the traitor McGreedy had declared, the warrior was swarmed by a horde of grotesque creatures. He was cursed with a horrifying immortality. No matter if his flesh was devoured or his innards torn out, his body would regenerate instantly. This condemned him to an endless cycle of unimaginable pain and torment as he was eaten alive over and over again. This agony continued for 1,200 years. After more than a millennium of suffering, his body had been warped into a monstrous form, covered in the screaming faces of his own anguish. Despite his grotesque transformation and the ceaseless pain, his will remained unbroken. He declared that no matter how many millennia passed, his vengeance would never yield, not to the traitor, not to fate, and not to his agony. He vowed that he would surely rise again and make his betrayers submit. After enduring his torment for so long, he finally begged for death. But instead of release, a voice called out to him, identifying him as Lord Liam and summoning his soul back into a vessel. In a brilliant flash of light, his consciousness was violently pulled from his monstrous prison. He awoke suddenly, finding himself in a completely new body, lying on the stone pavement of a city park at night. The sudden transition caused him to vomit a foul substance onto the ground. Staring at the filth in disgust, he wondered if this new vessel had expelled it. He tried to get up, but his body was too weak, and he found he couldn't stand. As he lay there helpless, a voice from nearby commented on his pitiful state. He looked up to see a group of garishly dressed men standing over him. One of them pointed out that the body he inhabited, apparently named Kai, was still lying on the ground. Another expressed brief concern, wondering if he was dead, but was quickly reassured by a companion who scoffed at the idea of becoming a murderer for some Kai. Satisfied that he was alive, they decided that as punishment for worrying them, they would dunk him in the nearby pond again. Liam, still trying to understand his new reality, was baffled by who these tormentors were. As they moved toward him, another person attempted to step in, but the bullies swiftly beat him down, calling him too soft. With the interruption handled, one of the men grabbed Kai by the hair, dragging him to the water's edge and forcing his head under. As the cold water enveloped him, Liam's eye began to glow with a familiar, menacing red light. Just then, a man who appeared to be their leader, whom they called Joshua, stepped forward to show them how it's done. He produced a syringe filled with a strange green liquid, explaining that it would force anyone injected with it to put on the funniest dance they had ever seen. He ordered his men to hold Kai down. Despite his protests, two of the bullies restrained him while Joshua administered the injection, taunting that he would become addicted to it. The drug coursed through Kai's veins, causing him to cry out in agony before he violently vomited. Immediately after, his body began to move on its own, twitching and flailing uncontrollably. His tormentors roared with laughter at the bizarre movements. Joshua, looking on with cruel satisfaction, mockingly commanded him to dance. Dance, like a puppet on strings. The drug's effects eventually subsided, and Kai collapsed to the ground, vomiting again much to the amusement of his tormentors. But the leader, Joshua, was not finished. He pinned Kai's head to the pavement with his foot, demanding to know who said he could rest. With a sadistic grin, Joshua commanded him to get up and dance until he died. But something had changed. Lying on the ground, Liam's consciousness took full control. He quietly remarked that he understood the situation now, and that the sight of these people made him sick. This sudden defiance caught the bullies by surprise, with one asking what he had just said. As Liam began to rise, a confident smirk spread across his face. Angered by this unexpected change, one of the larger men grabbed him by the collar, demanding to know what he was grinning at. In a sudden, powerful movement, Liam grabbed the bully's wrist, effortlessly halting his angry assault. The sheer force and speed of his counterattack stunned the entire group. Liam, or rather, the warrior now inhabiting Kai's body, met the bully's shock with an ice-cold stare, his eyes glowing with a renewed, menacing blue light. He declared with absolute certainty that his tormentors were trash, and then concluded with a cruel, final smile that trash must be judged. In a tense nighttime confrontation, a large, intimidating man in a uniform violently grabbed a smaller, dark-haired young man by the collar. The aggressor, his face twisted in a sneer, angrily questioned if the young man had dared to call them trash, remarking on his insolent attitude. Though bruised and overpowered, the young man's expression was defiant. He closed his eyes and gripped the hand holding him, a silent focus settling over him. An inner power began to stir, a weak ice magic, seemingly insignificant, but glowing intensely from the core of his being. Unaware of this, the larger man roared that he would show the boy what real pain felt like and drew back his fist to strike. As the punch was thrown, a sudden surge of frigid, blue energy erupted from the young man, intercepting the blow with a shimmering wave of ice. The attacker's furious expression morphed into one of utter shock and confusion as his attack was stopped dead in its tracks. His fist was now encased in a thick layer of crystalline ice that had formed from the young man's hand. The larger man stared in horror at his trapped limb, demanding to know what his opponent was. In response, the young man, now looking up with a chilling and triumphant smirk, informed his captor that there was no escape. He stood tall, his entire left arm now transformed into a formidable gauntlet of jagged, glowing ice. With newfound power radiating from him, he swung his icy weapon at his terrified foe. The icy gauntlet connected with brutal force, smashing into the man's face and distorting his features in a grotesque display of pain. The sheer power of the blow sent him flying backward, landing hard on the pavement. Lying crumpled on the ground, the the once intimidating aggressor could only cry out in agony. Standing over him, the young man, whose name was revealed to be Kai, coldly dismissed his fallen foe as pathetic. Watching from a distance, the man's companions were frozen in disbelief, their faces pale with shock and terror. One of them, his voice filled with incredulity, wondered aloud how Kai had suddenly become so strong. Kai, however, was lost in his own thoughts. He realized that the original owner of the body he now inhabited had been completely unaware of how to properly use his own strength. He clenched his ice-covered fist, reflecting that even when he struck with all his might, the power felt disappointingly frail to him. A menacing, dark blue aura began to swirl around Kai as he turned his cold, determined gaze toward the remaining trio, who flinched under his intimidating presence. With the first aggressor dealt with, Kai turned his attention to the remaining three, announcing that it was now their turn. Seeing the ominous power radiating from him, the trio panicked and turned to flee in terror. However, Kai simply extended a hand, and with a bored expression, unleashed a wave of his ice magic. A massive wall of jagged ice erupted from the ground, instantly trapping the fleeing students and stopping their escape cold. One of them could only cry out in disbelief as their feet were frozen in place. Surveying the now defeated bullies, Kai stood over them, calmly adjusting his uniform. He thoughtfully touched the bruises on his own face before suddenly calling out to one of the boys, a blonde-haired youth who startled in fear. With a menacing purple aura, Kai got uncomfortably close and demanded the boy hand over his clothes, complaining that his own uniform reeked of swamp. He then turned to another of the downed students, the one with green hair, and informed him that his jacket would do nicely as a hand towel. Having stripped them of their clothes and dignity, Kai turned and walked away, leaving the humiliated group on the cold pavement. He casually remarked that what he had done was good enough, satisfied with the outcome of the confrontation. As Kai began to walk away, he paused and turned back to the defeated group, getting their attention once more. With a sinister smile and a menacing purple aura, he mused aloud that perhaps he should just drown them all in the swamp. This chilling threat sent a wave of pure terror through the bullies, their faces contorting in horror. The green-haired student, desperate to escape this fate, immediately began to plead. With a forced, fearful smile and his hands pressed together, he stammered that they understood and were sorry, begging Kai to spare them. Kai, however, looked on with a cold, almost confused expression, asking what the boy was even talking about. His demeanor shifted to a knowing smirk as he recalled dealing with far worse individuals. He told the boy that for people like them, who had likely taken countless lives, the idea that a simple apology could grant forgiveness was far too selfish. The bullies recoiled in fear at his dark words. In a final, desperate act of self-preservation, the green-haired student dropped to his knees, frantically trying to shift the blame. He insisted that it wasn't their fault and that a person named Joshua had been the one giving them orders, claiming they were powerless to defy him. Kai listened to this revelation with a calculating expression. As the student's words sank in, an image of this Joshua flashed in his mind, and he quietly acknowledged the name of this new target. Kneeling on the pavement, the green-haired student continued his desperate plea, explaining that it was Joshua's idea to make Kai the target of the Liam's Descendant game. The name of the game meant nothing to Kai, who leaned in and sternly demanded an explanation. The student hesitated, remarking that Kai should already know the rules, but a flash of fury in Kai's eyes and a tight grip on his collar quickly changed his mind. Stammering an affirmative, he began to explain. He described a cruel tradition that had been passed down among the students of the Royal Magic Academy. In this game, one student was chosen to be the descendant of a traitor named Liam Hill, after which they would be systematically tormented and punished by the entire student body. The name Liam Hill struck a deep chord within Kai. An image of a taller, more imposing version of himself flashed in his mind, and he was momentarily stunned. The student, unaware of Kai's internal shock, expressed his own disbelief that Kai didn't know the story, saying that even children were taught the tale of the traitor's defeat. He elaborated that Liam Hill was the most infamous villain of his time, a man so powerful and evil that it took 99 heroes to finally strike him down. This revelation hit Kai with the force of a physical blow, leaving him standing in stunned silence as he absorbed the terrible legacy of the man he once was. With a terrifying grin spreading across his face, the dark-haired figure, clad in a sharp, blood-red and black suit, declared his chilling intent. His hand partially obscured his features, yet the single visible eye burned with a demonic, red glow against the shadowy background, emphasizing his resolve. The air was thick with malice as he proclaimed that history itself must be corrected. Suddenly, the narration shifted to a glowing, golden image of the past. 3 figures, the self-satisfied smiles of 2 men and a woman, stood bathed in a crackling yellow light, the very picture of triumph. The central male figure, with wild, reddish-orange hair, seemed to radiate a false power. The narrator sneered, revealing their deceit. These smug, so-called false victors, were the ones who had cunningly fabricated a ridiculous, counterfeit version of history. Under the vast, star-dusted night sky, the group arrived before a large, shadowed residence. One of the guides announced to the young man with blue-tinged hair that this was his home. As they got closer, however, it became apparent that the grand structure was nothing more than a ruin, overgrown and falling into disrepair. The men who had been forced to guide him there murmured amongst themselves in hushed, fearful tones, questioning why he would make them escort him all the way to his own dilapidated home. Sensing their unease, the young man stopped and turned back to face them, coolly getting their attention. With a dismissive look, he told them they could leave for the day. A wave of relief washed over the group, but it was short-lived. As he turned to walk away, his expression hardened, and he delivered a chilling warning, telling them not to think for a moment that this was the end. The threat hung heavy in the air, leaving the men trembling in his wake. He approached the large, weathered door of the mansion and pushed it open with a creak. The interior was dark and coated in dust and cobwebs, clearly abandoned for some time. As he stepped inside, a well-dressed man appeared from the shadows, surprised to see him. He addressed the young man as, "Your Highness," and asked if he had already returned. The blue-haired youth stared back, his mind racing. He internally acknowledged that this body, this vessel, was indeed royalty. Yet, a frustration grew within him. He found that while the painful memories of being bullied were vivid and accessible, he couldn't seem to draw any other information from his host's mind, as if the brain itself were rejecting the memories. Turning his attention back to the man before him, he cut straight to the point, demanding to know what the origin of Kai was. The man looked back, perplexed by the strange and sudden question. Of course. The butler slowly explained that the young man before him was, in fact, the 8th prince of the kingdom. Hearing this, the prince questioned why royalty would reside in such a dilapidated mansion instead of the main castle. The butler hesitated to answer, and from his reluctance, the prince correctly deduced there were special circumstances at play. His thoughts then drifted to the bullies from before, a cold anger rising as he wondered how they could have treated a royal prince with such blatant disrespect. Pushing the thought aside for the moment, he decided to let it go, noting to himself that his current body was clearly malnourished. As he began to walk away, the butler, alarmed by this strange and detached demeanor, called out for him to wait. In a worried tone, he asked Lord Kai what had happened to him, remarking that he seemed like a completely different person. The prince stopped in his tracks, his patience wearing thin. He thought to himself with irritation that a mere butler had no place questioning the words and actions of royalty, wondering if the man was intentionally belittling his master, Kai. However, a glance at the butler's face revealed not contempt, but genuine and deep concern. When the butler insisted that was not his intention, the prince observed his worried expression and let out a quiet sigh, his anger subsiding. He turned back to face the man fully, his gaze intense. He declared that he would make things clear, stating frankly that he never had any intention of acting like the person he was before. The prince looked the butler squarely in the eyes and delivered a blunt, shocking statement: the Kai he knew was dead. The butler could only stammer in disbelief, his mind reeling from the declaration. The prince, casually rubbing the back of his neck, continued, instructing the man that from this moment on, he should consider himself to be serving an entirely different person. With the conversation concluded, the prince retired to a grand but dusty bedroom, falling into a deep sleep under the pale moonlight filtering through the window. His consciousness, however, did not rest. It drifted back through time, to a memory from 2,100 years ago. The scene was a dark, rocky cavern where he stood with a red-haired man and a young woman. They were completely surrounded by a grotesque horde of shadowy monsters. He had called out to the man, McGreedy, addressing him as his big brother. A heavy air of despair hung over them as McGreedy, panting with exhaustion, suggested that it might have been too soon for them to face such a trial. His companion tried to encourage him, telling him not to speak that way, but her words were cut short. In a horrifying instant, McGreedy's face twisted in terror as one of the monsters lunged forward. A massive, sharpened limb pierced straight through his chest, eliciting a guttural cry of agony. Blood erupted from the wound as the force of the blow sent him flying backward, slamming his body hard against the cavern wall. From the darkness, the prince's own voice echoed in a grief-stricken cry, calling out for his brother in utter shock and horror. As his brother fell, the monsters immediately turned their attention to the female companion, Mimina. She cried out in terror as a slimy, purple tendril snaked around her leg, tripping her. Another wrapped itself tightly around her waist, and she let out a pained hiccup as the horde of grotesque creatures began to swarm her. Slumped against the cavern wall and bleeding profusely, the dying McGreedy used the last of his strength to command the beasts to stop, pleading with them not to lay a hand on her. Suddenly, a blinding flash of blue light erupted from above. A massive torrent of energy descended upon the monsters, blasting them with overwhelming force. The wave of power surged through the cavern, instantly incinerating the creatures and turning them to dust and shadow. When the light subsided, Mimina was left standing alone amidst the dissipating smoke, shaken but unharmed. A calm voice echoed from the ledge above, remarking that it looked like he had made it just in time. The wounded McGreedy looked up to see a figure silhouetted against the light. The newcomer looked down on the scene of devastation and casually asked McGreedy if he was even barely alive. The figure stepped into the light, revealing a young man with dark hair, piercings, and an unwavering, confident smirk. It was the prince himself, in a forgotten time. A man with spiky red hair, clad in armor, sat injured against a rocky cliff face. He looked up in weary disbelief at the blue-haired man, Liam, who had just made a dramatic entrance. The injured man questioned if Liam had truly come to save them, lamenting that he had previously insisted he wouldn't rely on his help. Liam stood over him with a cool demeanor, confirming he had. He teased the red-haired man, stating he had heard him shouting something childish. As he spoke, a brilliant, glowing green energy began to crackle and form in his hand. This healing power soon enveloped the red-haired man's wounded midsection. Liam remarked that the man's earlier words didn't matter, this way, there would be no problem. His immediate concern seemingly resolved, Liam turned to a shocked, blonde-haired woman nearby, asking how Mimina was. He then looked back down at the man he was healing, reminding him that he had been on his way to gather strengthening materials for them anyway. The red-haired man looked away, his face cast in shadow and etched with regret. He admitted quietly that he had gotten into this mess by acting on his own. In response, Liam simply offered his gloved hand. The red-haired man, battered and sweaty, stared at the offered hand, his expression softening with gratitude. He confessed that while Liam pissed him off sometimes, he had to acknowledge that he had just saved both his life and Mimina's. Their hands clasped in a firm, powerful grip, sealing the moment. The red-haired man declared with conviction that he would never forget this debt. Then, a young man with tousled, grayish-blue hair opened his tired eyes. Lying in bed, he stared blankly, processing the vivid images as he realized it had all been a dream. Waking fully, the young man sat up in his bed, the remnants of the dream overshadowed by a cold, simmering fury. He sat in the opulent, blue-lit room, clenching his fist with grim determination. He vowed to himself that he had to hunt down those ungrateful bastards and make them return the power they had taken. His eyes drifted towards the large, ornate window, his expression shifting. But, he considered, first things first. A chilling smirk twisted his lips as he decided he should properly express his gratitude to someone named Kai, for providing this body as a vessel. The day began with a view of a large, stately mansion, as a voice wished someone named Kai a good morning. Inside the opulent and cavernous dining hall, Kai was shown sitting all alone at the end of a long, empty table. A butler, standing formally to the side, announced that his breakfast was ready. The butler then approached Kai, holding up a small hand mirror. Kai, looking tired and slightly disoriented, reflected internally that it was hard to believe this was his second life. The breakfast was then revealed in a close-up, a very simple meal of porridge with potato chunks, 2 pieces of toast, and a drink. An internal thought noted that it was the same simple menu as the day before. Kai took a bite and immediately grimaced, confirming his suspicion that the food tasted awful. He stared down at the simple bowl, while the butler stood nervously in the background, holding a silver cloche. A close-up on the butler showed his anxious and apologetic expression. It was revealed through an internal monologue that the butler, who was not used to cooking, was the one preparing the meals, and that there appeared to be no one else in the entire mansion. Kai then picked up a piece of the toast, holding it up for inspection. The butler could only look on, speechless and tense. Overcome with shame, the butler bowed deeply, beginning to stammer an apology. Kai, however, sharply cut him off, ordering him to stop. In a different, more formal setting, Kai was then seen seated in a large, throne-like chair. He looked at the butler with a serious expression and told him firmly that if he was not at fault, he should not apologize. After finishing his meager breakfast, Kai internally resolved that the food situation absolutely needed to be improved, and quickly. Standing outside, he looked ahead with a hardened expression, his thoughts turning to his new life. He wondered how he was going to find the enemies of the original Kai, whose body he now inhabited. Later, he arrived at a grand, imposing academy. A determined blue aura emanated from him as he walked onto the campus among the other students, who were dressed in the same uniform and casually discussing things like magic history. As he made his way forward, the student body suddenly parted, making way for an approaching group. They were led by a young man with a supremely smug and arrogant look on his face, who strolled forward as if he owned the place. A voice from the crowd taunted Kai, mockingly asking if he had finally decided to show up to school. Kai's eyes narrowed as he instantly recognized the leader. This, he realized, was Joshua, the very person who had been bullying him. The two groups soon faced off in an open courtyard. Joshua, looking almost unhinged with a condescending grin, addressed Kai first. He'd heard, he said, that Kai had given these guys a good beating the day before and had really gotten carried away. Joshua then turned to his own cronies, spreading his arms wide to hype them up. He shouted, "Hey, you guys!" He asked them if they could possibly let this slide, expressing mock disbelief that a descendant of Liam would ever have the nerve to fight back, a clear and public insult. The confrontation escalated quickly as the bullies, egged on by Joshua, reacted with rage. They yelled that fighting back was getting way too cocky, and enthusiastically agreed to teach him his place. With a menacing, wide-eyed grin, Joshua ordered them to get him like you always do. The other students immediately rushed Kai from multiple directions in a chaotic, blurring attack. Kai stood still, however, observing the incoming assault. A wave of profound realization washed over him. He understood that this was the constant pain and humiliation the original Kai had endured. The intensity of the feeling caused a fierce reaction. Kai's eyes widened, and a dark, bloody liquid began to stream from them like tears, giving him an unnerving, terrifying appearance. He looked up, his expression cold and deadly, as the surrounding students continued their charge, taunting him for standing there, frozen, and asking if he was going to wet himself. The next moment was a blur of violence. A wide panel showed the results of Kai's counterattack. Multiple students were now on the ground, some kneeling in pain, others shocked, with scattered gravel indicating a rapid, forceful exchange. The other members of Joshua's posse froze, their faces registering shock and fear. Joshua himself looked around in disbelief at his downed allies before snapping his attention back to Kai, demanding to know, in a high-pitched yell, who told him to stop fighting. Kai simply turned his back on the group, walking away from the stunned bullies, leaving them speechless and defeated. Okay, so the bully squad got absolutely wiped. But Joshua, the head bully, is not taking the L. He steps up, flashing that smug grin, and is like, well, whatever, I'll beat you down myself, you piece of trash. The drama. Joshua throws a massive, charged punch, yelling, know your place. Bam! The hit lands with this crazy, fiery explosion of force. But our guy, Kai, blocks it. But wait, he feels the impact and realizes, ah, that's right, my body was the fragile one. And cue the jump scare, a graphic shot of his hand shows his bones literally bending and breaking. Ouch! That's gonna leave a mark. But Kai isn't just a tough guy, he's a healer. In one smooth, lightning-fast move, he grabs his wrist, there's a crackle of power, and he instantly heals the break. Like a total boss. The bullies are going wild. He healed himself. Unbelievable. They are completely losing it. Kai just wiggles his fingers like, yeah, no problem. The confidence. Joshua's face goes from smug to pure, unadulterated rage. He snarls, what an irritating bastard. And then, he gives us the moment we've been waiting for, he clenches his fist, and a massive orb of fire erupts in his palm. Forget the fists, we're going full magic battle. This is no ordinary schoolyard fight anymore. Joshua's not just a bully, he's a pyromaniac. Kai just went from dealing with bad breakfast to dodging fireballs. What is happening next? We need to know. You thought the punch was intense? Nah, fam, this is where the heat is at. Joshua, the pyromaniac bully, is completely snapping. He screams at the top of his lungs, just die, and unleashes a gigantic, orange column of pure fire magic straight at Kai. But Kai. Oh, he's got receipts. He drops a blue magic circle, then instantly generates this massive, jagged ice shield. It's a classic fire versus ice clash. The blast connects and it's a blinding, explosive chaos that shatters the ice everywhere. The fire is relentless. It punches through the shield, but Kai, using some galaxy brain move, manages to deflect the direct hit, though the sheer force still smacks him back. Did Kai lose? Nah, this is a shonen hero, baby. We cut to Joshua, and he is fuming but also bleeding. Turns out the magical clash messed him up. He's shocked, he's scared, and he and the last few bullies are watching in terror. Because Kai stands up, completely unfazed. He looks down at Joshua, who is now just a sad mess on the ground, spitting blood and shame. And Kai delivers the ultimate DSS, he looks around at the defeated crew and says, with pure disappointment, what? There was no resistance at all. Boom. It's a total knockout. The new Kai is not only powerful enough to heal broken bones, but he's also an elemental master who can shut down an entire bully squad without even breaking a sweat. From awful porridge to a legendary win, this is how you start a second life. What? A chapter. The intense magical battle came to an end, with Joshua and the other bullies defeated and lying in shock on the ground. Kai looked down at them with disappointment, noting that they had offered no resistance. Suddenly, a large man in a yellow jacket, presumably a staff member, arrived and sternly asked Kai what he was doing. The man then asked if Kai Asher was causing trouble. Kai immediately countered, stating that they were the ones who started it. The staff member dismissed Kai's justification with a dismissive, so what, and ordered him to stop talking back and simply come along. As Kai was led away, another defeated student muttered that the outcome serves him right, while a companion wondered how many weeks it would take Joshua to recover. As Kai walked, he was suddenly hit with a painful headache. An intrusive memory flashed into his mind, a stout man, who bore a strong resemblance to the staff member currently leading him away, raising a whip or cane to strike the original Kai. Kai clenched his fist, concluding that the traumatic image was a direct memory of the original Kai. He realized the original Kai had been living under the tyranny of the school staff, not just the students. After being led away by the staff member, Kai was brought to a formal, dark chamber. The staff member, a hefty man in a uniform, stood before him and accused him of being disrespectful. The man's face contorted in anger as he declared that Kai should have known his place, reminding him that this was a school and that his behavior was an insult to its prestige. Kai simply stared back, a mix of contempt and newfound resolve in his eyes, internally comparing the man's tyrannical speech to the corrupt memory he had just accessed. He thought about how the staff member was talking about respect and authority, while knowing the man was the very person who had abused the previous Kai. The staff member then raised his voice, demanding to know if Kai was even listening to him. He leaned in close to deliver a final, chilling threat, telling Kai that if he tried to pull any of his arrogant acts again, he would ensure Kai's life at the academy would be a living hell. The man then turned and walked away, dismissing Kai with a final order to get out of his sight. Kai was left alone in the room, his expression unreadable. He clenched his fists, realizing that the staff member, Mr. Lee, was a genuine enemy. Kai concluded that the old Kai had not just been weak, he had been trapped between abusive students and a corrupt teacher, which had likely led to his death. With a chilling, determined resolve, Kai decided that since he had taken the previous Kai's body, he would have to take care of Mr. Lee and the rest of his bullies.